Greetings viewers, this is Oklahoma Bridges, and we're going to look at another antique sewing machine today in this video. If you want to see more antique sewing machines, check out my sewing machine playlist. This machine was made by the New Home Sewing Machine Company of Orange, Massachusetts. And before I take the lid off, let me show you some of the nice carvings that are on the end here. As you can see, this machine has some nice decorative carvings here. At least I think they're carvings, they're not pressed in with using the steam press method that was used a lot back then. But a very nice decorative motif, sometimes referred to as a tree of life, but just very nice, much nicer than just having a plain flat end on the machine. And so while we're here too, we can unlock the machine because it is locked. It uses just a regular old triangle shaped sewing machine key. Okay. As I said, this machine was made by the New Home Sewing Machine Company, and it's a 3/4 size machine, which, for whatever reason, New Home called New National Machines. It still has the New Home Greyhound trademark on it, on the bed plate. That was their trademark to emphasize the fact that their machines were light running machines, which was important in the days when machines were muscle powered. And it's a very beautiful machine. This is a very nice machine with very nice gold leaf decals. We'll take a look at the mechanics of this machine before I show how to use it. If you're not interested in the mechanical operatings of the machine, you might want to skip ahead. I'll put the timestamp in the description below. But we're going to start by taking a look at the mechanism of the machine. Let's start our discussion with the bobbin driver mechanism. This is a shuttle machine. If I pull this slide plate out and roll the machine over a little bit, we can see the shuttle in there. It's held in what's known as a shuttle carrier. Another notable feature of this machine that's worth pointing out is the stitch length regulating control, which to the user is just a simple thumb screw that when you loosen it off, you can move it down or up. This being maximum stitch length, this being minimum stitch length. We're now looking at the back of the machine, and an interesting feature of this machine is the entire back of the arm comes off to access what's in it. All I have to do is loosen this single screw, and this cover plate comes off. As you can see, it's an iron casting that's been japanned. And now we can see what's inside the arm. There's two major components inside the arm that are worth pointing out to you. The main drive lever, which is right here, and a second drive link, which is right here. This main drive lever operates the shuttle carrier and causes the shuttle to move back and forth, and is part of the bobbin driver mechanism. This second link is for the feed and is part of what's known as a 4-motion feed. Now, what makes this machine so interesting to me compared to a lot of other machines is the fact that the motion for the feed is not split between the bobbin driver mechanism and the feed mechanism. They are totally separate. This lever does just the bobbin driver mechanism. It just swings the shuttle back and forth. If you saw my video on the Davis machine, you will have seen that although it uses a very similar shuttle mechanism, as you will see here, it derived the up and down motion of the feed dogs from the shuttle mechanism. This machine does not. The up and down and front to back motions of the feed dogs are derived entirely from this linkage right here. And if I roll the machine over, you will see that that linkage is attached at its upper end to a cam. You'll notice that not only does this cam cause the lever to move up and down, but also forwards and backwards. Now, normally, half of this motion would be wasted and only one direction would be used, and therefore the motion would be split between two different sections of the mechanism. But in this case, this uses both of them, and it uses it in a very clever way. Now we can see the entire length of the link from bottom to top, and you can just make out underneath the second linkage that's horizontal that connects this vertical link to the actual carrier that holds the feed dogs. And if I rotate the machine over, you can see that the lower end of that rod is moving up and down. Now, if you'll notice, my stitch regulating adjustment is at the bottom. This link rod has a slot in it. The pivot point on this adjustment rides in that slot. And what it does is very interesting. It allows the up and down motion from the cam to be transferred to the bottom end of the rod just as it is. When the cam moves the top end of the rod up, the bottom end of the rod goes up. When the top end goes down, the bottom end goes down. But the side-to-side motion is forced to pivot, and this is the pivot point. With the stitch set for maximum stitch length, watch what happens to the bottom of the link rod. It's now making an up and down and a front and back motion. Now at this angle it might be hard to see, but in a moment we're going to look at the underside of the machine and the motion will be much more clearly visible. With the stitch length set in a mid position as I rotate the machine, the link rod is still making an up and down motion, but it's making much less of a front to back motion. Now with the machine tipped back, we can look at the underside. And now we can see the bottom end of the main drive lever, the horizontal drive lever, the shuttle carrier, and you can just barely see it, but the shuttle is right there. This is the connecting link for the feed, and then this is the lower feed rocker arm, and then this is the carrier lever that the feed dogs right here are actually attached to. Now let me just briefly rotate the machine over a little bit for you so you can see what's going to happen, and then I'll explain what's going on. The stitch length is set to almost the maximum length of stitch. I'm now going to set it to the minimum length of stitch. Let's start our discussion with the stitch regulator in this position. Now, as you can probably see, because of the angle that the camera is viewing the mechanism at, with the stitch length set in the minimum position, it looks like this lever is barely moving at all. In fact, it is moving like this, with this end moving up and down, and this end moving up and down. But as far as the rocking motion front to back at either end, it's barely moving at all. So the feed dogs are still going up and down, but the stitch length is very, very short now. Almost stationary, in fact. When I go back to the maximum stitch length position, the lever moves quite a bit more. Moving the stitch regulator changes the pivot point of this vertical link rod. and thus changes the ratio with which one end of the rod swings with respect to the other. Now the top end of the rod always swings the same amount. That's fixed by the cam. So if you want to alter the stitch, you've got to move the pivot point up or down to change the length of the lever arms relative to each other to vary the stitch length. This mechanism is rather interesting. It's one of a diminishing number of machines that were made as the 19th century and early 20th century went on, where one mechanism derived all this motion. Some other competing machines, such as machines made by the Davis Sewing Machine Company, used the motion from this lever to obtain the fixed up and down motion, and then used a second link lever to operate the variable part of the motion, the feed motion. Whereas this mechanism very cleverly utilizes both the up and down and front to back motion of that eccentric cam to give the lever all four of the motions it needs to create the four motion feed. Now let me tip this machine down at an angle to where it's closer to level to the camera, and you can see the up and down rocking of this lever. I'm going to put the stitch length about the maximum position and roll it over a few turns in that position. And then I'm going to lower the machine down here to where this lever is closer to dead on with the camera. And you can see the lever moving up and down more clearly. It's mechanisms such as these and all the variations that make old sewing machines so interesting. Every manufacturer was competing with each other, trying to find the best way, and at the same time get around each other's patents on mechanisms that all do essentially the same thing. So there was a great variety of machines and mechanical layouts that in the end all do basically the same thing, but get there in a different way. And of course, each manufacturer was touting the advantages of their particular system. Before I cover how to use this machine, I want to go over one very interesting feature of it, and that is this cabinet that it's in. This is what, I don't know what the official name for these would be, but I call it a convertible cabinet because it's designed to go in a treadle stand, perhaps something like a drawing room cabinet, and be usable as a treadle machine, or it can be used as a hand crank machine. And the reason for this is, as you can see, around the perimeter of this base, it has a lip here going all the way around. So this would have sat in a cabinet with a cutout opening that matches the perimeter of this base. And if we turn the machine around on the crank end here, you can see a pair of holes right here. And these would have been for the treadle belt to go through, because they line up perfectly with the groove on this pulley here. So you could use this as either a machine for use in the home on a cabinet, perhaps a drawing room or a parlor cabinet, or with the bentwood case installed, you could use it as a machine while traveling. It'd be very interesting to see what the drawing room cabinet or treadle stand would have looked like for this. I've not seen any. They've got to be out there, or did it become unfashionable at some point to have such a large piece of furniture and they were unceremoniously disposed of, while the more portable heads in their convertible cabinets were kept in service. But that is a very interesting feature of this machine, and it's not the only machine I have that's like this. I have a few others, and I will show those in future videos. But now is the point where we should demonstrate how this machine works. And this is a hand crank machine, and it has a hand crank here which can be stowed like this, so you can put the cover back on. It's a very nicely made hand crank assembly. It has a very nice latching mechanism that will very positively latch, and you have to pull out on this knurled knob here in order to unlatch it to put it back in the storage position. This is the crank drive arm, and it has a spring-loaded plunger on it, so where it fits snugly between the spokes on the hand wheel. And the hand wheel, as you can see looking at the spokes, there is a specific place for the hand crank to go. The hand crank drive arm needs to go between these two narrow spokes right here. While we're looking at the machine from this end, I should also point out the stop motion clutch is a knob here which you pull out and rotate to disengage the hand wheel from the rest of the machine. This portion right here in the middle will stay connected to the machine. When you're ready to connect the hand wheel to the rest of the machine, you rotate that until it snaps, and then you rotate this until it snaps on down in again, and now they are connected together rigidly. Much better than the friction type clutch arrangement that other companies used, much more positive acting. So, to use this machine, the first thing we're going to need to do is wind a bobbin. So we're going to pull this out and turn it to disengage the machine from the hand wheel. Now we're going to engage the drive. And the drive finger on this machine is a little different than some. It doesn't flip up, it flips down into between the spokes like that. The bobbin winder is driven using a rubber tire, and it's very clever in that the tire would ride either on the leather belt or in the groove where the belt goes when being used as a portable. And in order to use the bobbin winder, we first need to get the thread distributing lever over to the right as far as it will go. Now, as you can tell, my bobbin winder tire is about due for replacement. This machine is geared for right-handed people, and you turn the crank handle over away from you to make the machine operate in the correct direction. I now have a bobbin, and this bobbin has no thread on it, and we need to put some thread on it so that we can sew with the machine. To do that, we place the bobbin in the bobbin winder like so. And then we need to add some thread. Take a spool of thread, place it on the spool pin, go around the tension screw, through the thread guide at the bottom of the distributing lever, through the thread guide at the top of the distributing lever, and then pinch the thread on the end of the bobbin like that. And let me zoom in so you can see what's going on. With it threaded up like so, we press the bobbin winder up against the drive and turn the crank and wind the bobbin. Okay, and it's good practice to stop the bobbin winder at the end so that it's ready for you the next time you need to do some winding. And we can cut the thread off. And now the bobbin is wound and ready for use. In order to use the bobbin, we have to insert it in the shuttle. We withdraw the front slide plate, turn the machine over far enough that we can reach in and pull the shuttle out. And if there's a bobbin in the shuttle, we can go ahead and remove it. The bobbin should be arranged with the thread running under towards you. Then hold the shuttle in one hand like so and place the bobbin down in it. Place a fingertip over the end of the bobbin to keep it from rotating and run the thread down through the slot in the shuttle. You're going to run it down and pull it down towards the front of the shuttle like so until you feel it click over the tip of the tension spring. And once you are certain that it's under the tip of the tension spring, you can take the thread and then pull it back like so. The thread is correctly inserted in the bobbin when it's passing over the spring like this. You can see the thread coming up, passing over the tip of the spring, and then back down under. With the shuttle threaded, we can now reinsert it back in the machine. It goes into the shuttle carrier with the lower thread tension adjusting screw pointing up. Like so. Now we can close the slide plate and be sure not to pinch the thread. Do not close the slide plate tightly. Leave the thread up on the top of the bed plate until it is caught by the upper thread. Let's now turn our attention to the upper thread. This machine is actually fairly simple to thread. It's not very complex. It uses perhaps the most simple of all tension systems, just a simple leaf spring tension. There is a release lever here which raises the leaf spring up and cocks it just enough that the thread passes loosely through it. There is a hole and a slot on the top of the leaf spring. When threading the machine, the thread is going to pass through there like this. Adjust the tension nut to where you feel a little bit of tension, but not a lot. Next, the thread goes through a thread guide in the upper end of the needle bar. This is fairly easy to do. Pop the thread through the thread guide and then pass it through the hole in the needle bar. On the end of the arm, on the crosshead cover, there is a thread guide and a check spring. Now, there might be a few different ways that you can do this, but I found the easiest way is to just take the thread, pass it through the thread guide, and then take the check spring and hook the thread like that with it. If it's threaded like this, where you give the thread a pull and the check spring moves over, you've got it threaded correctly. The last step in threading the machine is to pass the thread from left to right through the eye of the needle. To do this, have the needle at its highest point. With the needle threaded, press on the tension release lever and pull the thread out a little bit. Take it and pass it under the presser foot and to the back. We now rotate the machine one full turn in the normal direction while holding the thread, and really you can just kind of hold it loosely. When the needle bar gets back up to its highest point, take the thread and pull up on it like this, and you will have a loop of the lower thread, which you can then grab hold of and pull up, and then close the plate up solid. The machine is now ready to sew. And to do some test sewing, I'm just going to use a piece of scrap fabric here and place under the presser foot. Lower the presser foot down and turn the crank, and we might have to adjust the tension a little bit, but nothing too bad. So let's see how it goes. Let's do a little bit longer stitch, shall we? As you can see, the stitch is not adjusted quite right. You can see the bottom stitch is just lying flat on the fabric, whereas the top stitch is going down. So we need to give the adjustment screw just a little turn and try it again. As you can see, that's much better. Using this machine is pretty simple. The only real basic thing you should know about it is when turning a corner, and you get to the point where you want to turn a corner, stop the machine with the needle just starting to raise up, raise the presser foot, turn the corner, lower the presser foot back down, and continue sewing. I hope you enjoyed this look at the New Home, New National 3/4 size sewing machine. Feel free to ask any questions you might have about the machine and its use. It's a very simple machine to operate. There's not much to it, and there's not much that can go wrong. It's very well built, very rugged. If you take care of it and oil it every once in a while and keep it clean, it will last several lifetimes. As always, this is Oklahoma Bridges, and thank you for watching.